Few of Napoleon Bonaparte's marshals inspired as much admiration or as much controversy as André Masséna. To his soldiers, he was fearless, relentless, and seemingly invincible on the battlefield. To his enemies, he was one of the most dangerous generals France ever produced. Napoleon himself once remarked that Masséna's military genius seemed to grow in the midst of battle, earning him the title, the dear child of victory. Yet unlike many of France's great commanders, André Masséna was not born into privilege or military nobility. His rise was one of the most remarkable success stories of the French Revolutionary era. Welcome to the Marshal End. Today we begin our series exploring the lives of the marshals of the First French Empire. In this inaugural episode, we'll examine my personal favorite, Marshal André Masséna, the commander Napoleon famously called the dear child of victory. This is the first of many biographies covering the remarkable military leaders and influential figures who shaped the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. Whether you are a long-time student of military history or just beginning your journey, I hope you'll join us as we explore the lives, campaigns, triumphs, and legacies of these men and women who defined an age undreamed of. Masséna was born on May 6, 1758 in Nice, then part of the Kingdom of Sardinia. His father died when André was still a child, forcing him into a difficult upbringing. As a teenager, he worked as a cabin boy aboard merchant ships before eventually enlisting in the Royal Italian Regiment of the French Army in 1775. For 14 years, he served as an ordinary soldier. Although he demonstrated exceptional ability, France's rigid class system prevented commoners from becoming commissioned officers. Advancement was reserved almost exclusively for the nobility. When his enlistment expired in 1789, Masséna left the army as a senior non-commissioned officer with extensive battlefield experience, but little prospect for greater advancement. Everything changed with the outbreak of the French Revolution. As the old aristocratic officer corps fled France or were dismissed, talented common soldiers suddenly found opportunities that had once been unimaginable. Masséna quickly returned to military service, and his promotions came with astonishing speed. Within only a few years, he advanced from captain to general officer, distinguishing himself during France's desperate campaigns against the First Coalition. While many revolutionary armies struggled with inexperienced leadership and poor discipline, Masséna repeatedly demonstrated an extraordinary instinct for maneuver, aggressive attacks, and maintaining morale under impossible circumstances. His greatest triumph came during the Italian campaigns of the 1790s. Serving under the young General Napoleon Bonaparte, Masséna became one of the French army's most dependable battlefield commanders. At battles such as Lonato, Castiglione, Arcole, and Rivoli, he repeatedly led decisive assaults that shattered Austrian armies and secured French dominance in northern Italy. At the Battle of Rivoli in January 1797, Masséna's divisions played a critical role in defeating a much larger Austrian force attempting to relieve the siege of Mantua. The victory effectively ended Austria's hopes of reclaiming northern Italy and established Napoleon's reputation as one of Europe's greatest military commanders. Napoleon never forgot Masséna's contributions. Unlike some marshals who owed their rank primarily to political loyalty, Masséna had earned his reputation through relentless combat. Napoleon knew that whenever the fighting became desperate, Masséna was the one man who could restore the situation. Yet, it was during the campaigns of 1799 and 1800 that Masséna firmly established himself as one of Europe's greatest generals. Following a series of French setbacks during the War of the Second Coalition, Masséna was placed in command of the Army of Helvetia in Switzerland. Facing a combined Austro-Russian force that greatly outnumbered his own, he understood that survival depended upon speed, deception, and striking before the enemies could fully unite. On September 25th and 26th of 1799, Masséna launched a bold offensive at the Second Battle of Zurich. Rather than simply defending the city, he crossed the Limmat River under the cover of darkness, catching the Austrian army completely off guard. French troops rapidly broke through the enemy's lines while coordinated attacks drove the Austrians back across the battlefield. At the same time, the renowned Russian commander Alexander Suvorov was marching through the Swiss Alps to join his Austrian allies. But by the time Suvorov arrived, Masséna had already shattered the Austrian army. Finding himself isolated deep in hostile mountain terrain, Suvorov was forced to conduct one of the most difficult retreats in military history, abandoning artillery, supplies, and thousands of men before finally escaping into Austria. The victory at Zurich was one of the most decisive French victories of the French Revolutionary Wars. It effectively destroyed the Allied campaign in Switzerland, preserved France's eastern frontier, and broke the momentum of the Second Coalition. Many historians consider it Masséna's masterpiece, a victory won not through superior numbers, but through brilliant operational planning, aggressive leadership, and impeccable timing. The following year, Masséna faced an entirely different challenge. In April 1800, Napoleon ordered him to defend the strategic port city of Genoa against overwhelming Austrian forces, while the first consul prepared his own army to cross the Alps into northern Italy. Masséna understood that his mission was not necessarily to win, but to delay the enemy for as long as possible. For nearly 2 months, he and his soldiers endured the terrible siege of Genoa. Surrounded on land and blockaded by sea, food quickly disappeared. Horses, mules, dogs, and even rats became sources of nourishment as famine spread throughout the city. Disease weakened both soldiers and civilians, yet Masséna refused repeated Austrian demands to surrender. Despite starvation and constant bombardment, he launched repeated sorties against the besiegers, forcing them to commit far more troops than they had expected and delaying their operations week after week. One such sortie was led by the future Marshal Jean de Dieu Soult, but his is a story for another episode. Every day that Genoa continued to resist bought precious time for Napoleon's grand strategy to unfold. Finally, on June 4th, 1800, with his army exhausted and the city on the brink of total starvation, Masséna negotiated an honorable surrender. His troops marched out with their weapons and military honors, having fulfilled their mission. The siege proved to be one of the most strategically important delaying actions of the Napoleonic era. By holding Genoa for nearly 2 months, Masséna tied down tens of thousands of Austrian soldiers, preventing them from reinforcing northern Italy. Just 10 days after Genoa fell, Napoleon crossed the Alps with his army of the reserve and defeated the Austrian army at the Battle of Marengo, a victory that restored French control over Italy. Napoleon later acknowledged that Masséna's stubborn defense of Genoa had been indispensable to the success of the entire campaign, remarking that the general had won more battles with his time than with his sword. Their partnership continued during the campaigns of the Consulate and later during the French Empire. In 1804, when Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of the French, André Masséna was among the original 18 men appointed as Marshals of the Empire, an honor reserved for France's greatest military leaders. However, known for being blunt and candid, he was unimpressed with this new promotion, citing that there was 14 active marshals. His most celebrated achievement came 5 years later during the War of the Fifth Coalition. In 1809, Austria launched another attempt to overthrow French dominance in Europe. During the brutal Battle of Aspern-Essling, Napoleon suffered his first major battlefield defeat. Although the French army was forced to retreat across the Danube, Masséna displayed extraordinary courage under fire. Despite suffering a painful leg injury after being thrown from his horse, he refused to abandon command. Unable to ride, he directed the retreat from a carriage while personally rallying exhausted troops. His calm leadership prevented what could have become a catastrophic rout and preserved much of Napoleon's army for the campaign that followed. Only weeks later, At the decisive Battle of Wagram, Masséna again demonstrated his resilience. Still unable to ride because of his injury, he commanded his corps from a specially constructed carriage that carried him across the battlefield. Despite his condition, his troops successfully executed one of the campaign's most important attacks, helping secure another French victory over Austria. Napoleon rewarded him with the title Prince of Essling, honoring his conduct during one of the empire's most difficult campaigns. Yet Masséna's most notorious independent command was yet to come. In 1810, Napoleon entrusted him with leading nearly 70,000 men into Portugal to drive the British army under Arthur Wellesley, 1st Duke of Wellington, from the Iberian Peninsula. It would become one of the most difficult campaigns of his career. Although Masséna defeated Anglo-Portuguese forces at the Battle of Busaco, Wellington refused to fight another major engagement. Instead, he withdrew behind the immense defense system known as the Lines of Torres Vedras, a network of fortifications secretly constructed north of Lisbon. When Masséna finally reached the lines, he discovered one of the strongest defensive positions ever created. Unable to break through, lacking supplies, and facing widespread starvation among his troops, the French army remained trapped for months while Portuguese militia and British forces steadily wore it down. Eventually, with no realistic prospect of success, Masséna ordered a difficult retreat back into Spain. Although the withdrawal was conducted skillfully and avoided complete destruction, the campaign marked the first major strategic failure of his career. Napoleon, increasingly frustrated with setbacks in Spain, relieved him of command. Upon his return, Napoleon confronted him, stating, "So, Prince of Essling, you are no longer Masséna," criticizing the marshal's lack of what was his former vigor. It was the beginning of the end for one of France's greatest military commanders. Masséna never again exercised an important independent command. Unlike marshals such as Louis-Nicolas Davout or Michel Ney, he played no significant role during Napoleon's invasion of Russia in 1812 or the 1813 German campaigns that followed. By the time Napoleon returned from exile from the island of Elba during the 100 Days in 1815, Masséna's health had deteriorated considerably. Though he accepted a ceremonial position, he took no active part in the Waterloo campaign. Following Napoleon's final defeat, Masséna wisely avoided political confrontation with the restored Bourbon monarchy. Unlike several of his fellow marshals, he escaped execution, imprisonment, or exile, remaining largely withdrawn from public life. Despite his extraordinary military talent, Masséna was far from a flawless figure. He developed a reputation for greed, frequently enriching himself through requisitions, captured property, and wartime plunder, particularly during his campaigns in Italy and Portugal. His personal life was also marked by scandals and accusations of corruption, which tarnished his reputation among both allies and subordinates. Even Napoleon occasionally criticized his avarice, believing that Masséna's love of wealth sometimes clouded his judgment. André Masséna died in Paris on April 4th, 1817, at the age of 58. His legacy remains one of remarkable military achievement. He was not known for elegant strategy in the style of Napoleon, nor the iron discipline of Davout. Instead, Masséna possessed an extraordinary instinct for battlefield command. He could inspire exhausted soldiers, seize fleeting opportunities, and remain composed amid chaos when lesser generals would have collapsed. Napoleon once declared that Masséna's true genius appeared only when cannon began to fire. It was in the confusion, smoke, and violence of battle that he consistently performed at his very best. Historians continue to rank André Masséna among the greatest commanders of the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. His victories in Italy helped establish Napoleon's rise to power. His leadership at Aspern-Essling and Wagram preserved the French army during some of its most dangerous moments, and his career embodied one of the revolution's defining ideals, that talent, rather than birth, could carry a man from the ranks of an ordinary soldier to the highest command in Europe. It is little wonder that history remembers him by the title Napoleon himself bestowed upon him, L'enfant chéri de la victoire, the dear child of victory. If you enjoyed this biography, consider liking the video, subscribing to the Marshalette, and leaving a comment telling us who your favorite Marshal is and why. Your choice might just become the subject of our next episode. Thank you for watching, and until next time, join us as we continue our march through military history, exploring the campaigns, commanders, and empires of an age undreamed of.